So now let's open the session number 1 on the theme of Tokyo Urban Identity in Globalization. Well, these days in the society we are really fast speed globalization, and we would like to think about what the urban identity is for Tokyo in the context of globalization. Well, when we say Tokyo, it can be really broad. It can include a lot of areas around it. But then, do we have identity for Tokyo? That's the first point. When you look at different cities around the world, for example, this is a picture of Bangkok. You see a lot of the skyscrapers. Manila, again, growing number of the skyscrapers. What about Beijing? Likewise, in the center of the city, the number of the skyscrapers is going up all the time. In Seoul, the same story. And now, all around the world, high-rise buildings are occupying the central part of the cities. It's really covering the central area of global cities. Of course, there may be some difference in case of Jakarta. You have some unique shape of the skyscraper, and that will tell us which city we are looking at. Kuala Lumpur is famous for Kuala Lumpur Tower. And also you have the television antenna tower, so they tell us which city we are looking at. In China, for example, in Guangzhou, there's a Guangzhou Tower, and also high-rise building is being developed now. And a typical example of such a city is Hong Kong. There's been always the case that Hong Kong has had a lot of skyscrapers, but the number is growing. Close to us, you can see the International Commerce Center, ICC, and also, IFC, International Financial Center, and back in the picture you can see International Commerce Center, and both of them are as tall as close to 500 meters. So Hong Kong is unique in the sense that the number and the density of high-rise building is higher. But what about this city? Do you know which city we're looking at? All the pictures that we saw in the past are filled with high-rise buildings. Can you tell which city we are looking at? The answer is very simple. It's Tokyo. So the landscape, the townscape that is really based on the skyscraper is common. So without any particular tower, you can't tell which city it is. And this is the central part of Tokyo. And what will happen to this area? Of course, the number of the buildings is going up. In the coming 10 years, the landscape also will include more of the high-rise buildings. And this is the bird view. And, for example, in Otemachi Marunouchi Structure area, close to Tokyo Station, maybe the west side of Tokyo Station, you see the Imperial Palace close to us, and then the number of the high-rise buildings go up all the time. But this is not the end of the story. In coming 10 years, the landscape will be like this. So the high-rise landscape is going to be double in terms of the volume. That's what's happening in the Marunouchi area or Otemachi area. So always there's been a lot of high-rise building in this area, but because of the chain type urban redevelopment, the number of the high-rise buildings is going up. When we say chain type redevelopment, this means the buildings are built and then people will move in from the next door area, and then the next door area will have the redevelopment. And then in Tokiwabashi area, which is the north side of the Tokyo Station, will have a building which is close to 400 meters. And this is going to be the last piece to fill the puzzle in this area. What about Toranomon area? This is recently completed Toranomon Hills, and just behind it you see different types of buildings. Of course, on the left side you see Roppongi Hills, this building we're at. But that's not the only thing. On the Akasaka side, the number of the high-rise buildings are going up all the time. Now, what will happen in the future? In 10 years, many high-rise buildings will be added, and the landscape will be different than it is now. Especially Toranomon Hills is here in the center, but next to that there will be 2 additional high-rise buildings just next to it. What about Shibuya area? When you look at Shibuya district, this is what it is today. And the town of Shibuya is built on the valley, so it was difficult to build high-rise building. But the number of the high-rise building is going up recently. And they are rebuilding the station structure. And east side of that station will have a major change with additional high-rise buildings. And so again, the period of construction is about 10 years. It will be completed in 2027. Regarding Shibuya, there is a huge development which will be completed in very near future, not 10 years from now. And so all these pictures tells us that the landscape in central part of cities are changing, and in Tokyo too is not exception. And if you look around in Tokyo, there are a lot of redevelopment activities. It's great, you think, but actually central parts of major global cities are going through the same thing. So how can you create a character or identity of a city when everybody else is doing the same thing? In the past, it was difficult to make a high-rise building in Tokyo, but now it's changed. So what is the identity of Tokyo? So that is a very simple and yet very fundamental question. On the left side, you see the Singapore central part, and Marina Bay has hotels, 3 hotel buildings. On top of it, there's a kind of vessel, and on top of it, there's a pool. Actually, this vessel was made in Japan, made by a Japanese company, but this makes the part of the landscape. In center, you see Hong Kong. 2 high-rise buildings are there, and then in between, there will be higher building being built. And you see the picture of Seoul, because there's a tower, and that tells us it's a tower, it's a city of Seoul. In the left side center, you see Paris. So Paris doesn't have high-rise building, but beyond Eiffel Tower, you see La Défense. It's a new business district. When we say new, although this means that development has been going on since 1970s. So it's a exceptional city in the sense that Paris doesn't have high-rise building in the central part. And in center, you see the picture of Tokyo. And on the right side, you see London, which is has this wheel in the center. And in the left bottom, you see the picture of Manhattan. World Trade Centers are gone, but you see the landscape of New York today. So even in the case of a skyscraper town of New York, you need to have a landmark. And in the center, on the right side, in the center, you see Shanghai. There's a Pudong district, and this is an area that skyscrapers were built at one after another within a short time frame of less than 20 years. And in the center, center, that's Tokyo. That has Tokyo Tower, and on this side of it, Skytree was now already being completed. But the buildings that are made in Tokyo these days are high-rise buildings. And so, as I said before, it's the same thing with Roppongi, Toranomon, Akasaka, and also Marunouchi, Osaka, next to Tokyo Station. And also, it's the same story with Shibuya. That means in the future, when Tokyo wants to be characteristic with its own identity, what should be done? And also, what should be the identity of Tokyo? These are the questions we have to really think about. Now, today, luckily, we have great speakers, 3 people from New York. We have Professor Sharon Zukin, and we have Mr. David Malott, and also we have Professor Shunya Yoshimi from Tokyo. So from the social studies perspective and also from the practice studies aspects, we would like to ask from them what they think about the identity of Tokyo and identity of cities at large. Maybe we can get some answers from them, or maybe we get more sourceful ideas, more fruitful source, Well, now, spending 90 minutes from now, we would like to search for the answer for these two questions.